Hello and welcome back to the Christian Contrast Podcast, where we talk about the ways in which Christ calls us to live differently than the world around us. I'm back here again with Dan. How you doing, Dan? And we're going to be talking about purity in the church, and this will be our final episode where we talk about it. So hopefully we can begin to discuss where do we go from here.
Yeah.
I think some good questions have been brought up. Even our last episode, Lori brought up maybe that people didn't remain pure before marriage, but they're still coming to church and they hear all these messages of purity. So now what?
Yeah.
Now what do we do? What is some good advice from people can begin to have that conversation about where do we go from here?
Yeah. Well, and I would first say if anybody's watching this and hasn't watched or listened to the other ones, it'd be helpful to do so. You're going to benefit from this, I think. But it was great. Having Jeff on was really great. Having Lori on was really great. I felt like we were able to tackle some things that are important. And yeah, I think we want to look at this and say, all right, so what are the things that are practical to do if we're going to pursue purity in a way that really has a biblical conception of sexuality, that we're not avoiding sexuality because it's a part of ourselves that we need to shut down, but we're looking to trust God in this, and we're looking to walk in purity, and we're looking to enjoy to the fullest what God has given us here. So we want to talk about it like, all right, if you're single, if you're unmarried, if you're married in terms of trying to protect yourself against any temptations towards adultery or temptations towards pornography, which is obviously a single and a married issue for people. So, one of the things that comes up a lot, and I know this was a big thing when I was in high school and also in college, was just the whole concept of accountability partners. Mm-hmm. And probably for people listening to it, some have negative baggage with that, maybe a failed or even a forced accountability relationship.
Yeah.
Like I remember, I thankfully didn't experience this, but I remember a friend talking to me about how their church had sort of like mandatorily split them into groups and given them a group and said, you guys are all accountable to each other.
Right.
And it just did not work well. I've had some positive experiences with accountability, and the whole concept behind this is the idea that there's other people in the fight with you. Mm-hmm. Life is a battle. Walking with Jesus is a battle. We have an enemy. There's lies. There's temptations. I know there's all kinds of things that are different for men and women in this area, but I know just as men, and for any men listening to it, most of us know the raging temptations towards lust that get us into trouble with our eyes, with the computer mouse where we're clicking on things, mm-hmm. And in inappropriate relationships. So just to talk about what is it like to join with others in the battle. So we can talk about other things, but maybe let's start there. Have you had some positive experiences with what you'd consider accountability relationships?
Yeah, well, first, I think this concept could be new to some people.
Yeah.
They didn't grow up in the church. They didn't go to a youth group. Maybe they came to faith as an adult. And people are like, wait, I'm supposed to tell someone all the sin?
Right.
And is that person going to tell the pastor? I think the idea of accountability partner makes sense to a lot of us, but could be foreign.
For sure.
I think that you did a great job of defining it. It is someone who, in confidence walks through this with you, because they really want to see you get through this sin and support you, but also hold you accountable so that the next time you meet, there's some growth and some improvement. Yeah, I think it was definitely pre-marriage, young Christian guy. It was a big deal. Other young Christian guys were each other's accountability partner in college. And, it was, if there wasn't that opportunity in some type of organized youth group, it was a challenge to find someone who you could be that close with. And I remember, I came into a new church as an intern when there were some other youth interns, and it was probably maybe a year and a half of a friendship with another guy that we, decided that we would keep each other accountable. I think that it is taking a relationship kind of to a different place, and it's a lot of ways discipleship, where you're really having faith that this is going to be what helps you grow, kind of trusting that this is going to be a way in which you can not just improve in an area of struggle, but also probably kind of mold you and break you in some sense, and that you're going to struggle and fail, but you're going to grow through that, and someone's going to keep you accountable. I've seen it even after I've been married, get some married guys together and talk about some of the struggles maybe not so much around purity, but just marriage in general, hold me accountable to being a good husband and being respectful to my wife and being loving and things like that. For me, they've kind of been temporary because eventually the way life happens, you move away or someone leaves the group because they moved away, and the group can kind of crumble in the sense that,
Right.
you've got to start it all over again. So I think they work when they work, but sometimes it can be a struggle to get a good one going.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely right that we a lot of us have probably had experiences that are really positive and other ones that are kind of just okay. I think the whole concept for me, and I've seen this in my life and seen this in the life of others, but when I think about accountability, the concept would be saying, all right, it's got to be driven by the person who wants to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be driven by somebody else who's saying, I'm going to hold you
I
accountable.
see that sin in your life.
Right.
I want to be your accountability partner, so you stop.
And it could even come with a good heart of saying, I really want to help you. I see, or maybe the person is even fessing up. They're saying like, I'm looking at porn all the time on the internet. I want to stop. And so somebody else comes in and says, great, I'm going to hold you accountable. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work unless it's driven in many ways by the person who needs to get out of the sin or needs to be free from the sin. There are great things you can do, just zeroing in a little bit on the internet stuff because it's such a massive thing in our day. There's different sites or software that you can get where it sends things to an accountability partner so that they're going to get pinged if something questionable comes up, which to me is like, well, that's scary. That's also, I think for many, like that's a pretty good deterrent right there. Yeah. It's sort of like, there it is, objectively out there. That's different than the whole like, hey, did like, were you looking at, that lamppost or were you looking at that woman going by?
Yeah.
Where it's like, all right, you can kind of deny, you can kind of, get away with that. Whereas because internet pornography is such a massive pull and such an easy thing to fall into, and something where you could be like, hey, I haven't done this for a long time. And then all it takes is a few moments of weakness to get pulled into it. I think that stuff, any kind of software like that where you share that can be really helpful.
I just saw a new one. We have these Google ads that go out and kind of show videos about different things or topics, and one of them was pornography. So I was doing some research because some of the questions were going, I'm struggling with this. I went back to XXX Church, which came out,
that was like the
2000s.
Covenant Eyes and XXX Church were like the flagship ones.
That's right. And I did some, and they have like a new, it's hard to validate if this is helpful, but like a remote accountability partners that you might not know that just join together in a small group that all sign up at the same time. And you have like a weekly Zoom call with these people, and I was like, well, that could work, because they're removed. And maybe they don't go to your church, and if it doesn't work, or maybe you aren't involved that deeply into a church, something like that. I don't think I would have thought of 5 years ago. But that could work.
Yeah, it could work. I think for me, the heart of this so much is just in saying, as men and women, as we're looking at the area of sexuality and realizing that this is because this is something that's so precious, because this is something that is such a good gift from God, and is something that we all feel deeply about. Feel like we've tried to create a culture where we're casual about sex. It doesn't work. I feel like the Me Too movement is one of the evidences of this. We're like, sex is casual, but suddenly when it comes to the Me Too movement, we recognize rightly, sex is not casual. Right. This is a massive violation. This isn't just even, you stole $5 from my wallet. And so sex is not casual. It's something that's significant to us, and the enemy just goes for it in that area to look to get us off track. So I think it does start by saying, I think there are probably things we can do on a wider scale as churches or as organizations to facilitate it, but it's got to come from a heart of saying, I believe God has my best interests at heart. I believe the call for purity is not, it's a call to self-denial, but not long-term self-denial. It's a call to my long-term good for some temporary self-denial. And so for us to approach it and say, where do I need partners in this? And again, we talked, the internet thing to me is a huge way to start, especially for men, but I know sometimes for women also. And then I think like you just kind of move through the different stages and say, all right, there's stages of life, and some people that right now it's like, all right, you're single. either because you've never been married or because, you're divorced now. And so you're on the single scene, maybe you're dating, and you're trying to figure out, in a culture where sex is treated as something that's not scandalous outside of marriage, how do you set up your life where you're not going to fall into that? And it's funny, like an old fogey now, I'm 41, but I remember when Karina and I were dating, and before we were married, I lived in an apartment with 5 other guys, and Karina and I had made an agreement we will never be like somewhere alone together. And so we were never in my apartment alone together. One time, because I had 5 roommates, it was rare that there wasn't anybody else in the place. But there was one time where they were all out, and Karina and I, we'd come back to the apartment, I think after a church service, and we were going to just hang out and play games. Nobody was there. So we took a table from inside the apartment, brought it out onto the balcony out in front, and we were playing cards out front when they all got home, and they all thought we were ridiculous. They were like, you guys are so dumb. And the funniest thing was they were like, you guys aren't going to do anything. Sort of like, you love Jesus. You guys aren't going to do anything. We were like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, we are very attracted to each other. We're in our early 20s. Like, we might have even been engaged at the time. Like, we're already kind of thinking about marriage and how great it's going to be. Why in the world would we believe that this wouldn't be something that we would do, given too many opportunities to slip into it?
For sure.
So just to think through, what are the ways that we're setting up appropriate boundaries to protect ourselves? Just to say, man, you don't want to be in a position where 600 times within 2 hours you have to say no. You want to put yourself in a position where the no's are rarer, because you're more rarely in the position where it's a real possibility for you to act out in a way that you don't want to act out.
Yeah, I think it's good for us to acknowledge that things are going to have to change in your life if you want to go from a place of kind of sin struggle in this area to purity. I've talked to people, young adults or even adults who are dating, and they're like frustrated that every relationship ends up kind of in a sexual relationship way too early.
Right.
But they keep looking for their boyfriend or girlfriend in the same place. They keep going to like the clubs or whatever.
Right.
Like they come across somebody, they're like, wow, it seems like that's all they care about. When was the last time you looked for someone at your church or whatever it might be? And they're like, well, I don't know how to change my lifestyle. I don't know how to change my rhythms or the way that I've fallen into relationships or got into relationships, or even if it's, personal sin struggle with pornography, I don't spend less time on the computer or whatever it is.
Yeah. Am I willing to take big steps,
right?
To treat this? I mean, Paul talking in 1 Corinthians 6, flee sexual immorality. If you read through Proverbs, especially 5, 6, and 7, there's one part, I think it's in chapter 6, where Solomon says something like, can a man have burning coals in his lap without getting burned? It's a pretty vivid idea. Like, you are messing with big things with that. And so that is it. What you're saying is absolutely true. And I think so many times, whether it's with pornography, whether it's with the idea of an unmarried couple that's like, no, we're gonna abstain, but they keep finding themselves in bed together, to say, what are the extreme measures you need to take? It certainly starts with just our spiritual formation before the Lord, and with saying, I have a desire to trust you and to walk in the way that you're calling me to walk. But then to say, how silly are you willing to look to the people? And all my roommates at the time in the story I told, they were all believers. In the grand scale, they were all on our team. It wasn't a big point of shame. But I know for some believers, probably now even more so, to take extreme measures where they're like, you're not even willing to go to your apartment alone together and share a meal. You're staying away from these things. You're only kissing and you're not doing other things. You could end up just feeling like I look like a freak to my friends around me. Sure. And there's a level of even shame. We talked about shame in the last episode, but of unwarranted shame that you take on by looking to live a pure life. And the cost is there. The cost for the extreme measures is there. We've got to ask if we're willing to pay that cost. Yeah.
And there's probably a fine line and a balance between, when you talk about looking a fool in front of your friends, like working with students for a long time, there was an often a conversation like, are your friends the ones that are leading you down this path that making you feel ridiculous if you want to abstain? Are they encouraging you,
right,
maybe motivated by shame, to participate in some of the sins that you don't want to, and it's like, obviously it's easier to tell high school students because they're surrounded by so many friends, just get new friends.
Right.
But there's got to be some truth to that, and a fine line between, how much shame are you feeling from your friends because you want to do the right thing versus shame because it's the wrong thing from God.
Yeah.
And I remember like as a young 20s being kind of concerned, like kind of the drinking scene. A lot of my family were alcoholics, and I thought that maybe a few drinks you slip into that. And after 5 or 6 years, I kind of felt confident. I was like, I didn't surround myself with people who thought it was okay to drink until you get drunk. And so I felt confident that like I wouldn't just fall into that.
Right.
It wouldn't just be like one day
Right.
I'm drinking casually at a brewery and the next day I'm an alcoholic. I'm so scared of that because the people around me would have issues with me drinking too much.
Yeah.
So maybe surround yourself or try to with people who would have issues if you're going on a trip alone with another person of the opposite sex that you're not married to.
Right.
You would have a question about that instead of just like, that's normal for you guys to go to Vegas for the weekend.
No, I think that's a huge point because that even gets more broadly. It's sort of like the concept, the very formal concept of accountability partner. It's like, all right, that's a kind of new thing. I still think it's a thing that can be very valuable, but just, Proverbs talks about the whole, if you're a companion of fools, you suffer harm. And I think that's what you're getting at there. Just that there's a broader sense in what is normal in my context. If we're getting more broad than just the sexual purity, like if I'm, the friends that I have in my life, and I'm so grateful for this. If I was hanging out with any of like my 5 friends, I don't think of myself as having many friends.
Five is a good amount.
Five is a good amount. If I'm hanging out with any of them and I start complaining about Karina and just, oh my gosh, like she's so difficult. If I started doing something like that, any of those friends would start pointing me back towards, well, what is God calling you to do as a godly husband? They would not enable my whining. Those are good friends.
Right.
There's other friends, or there's other people that I could be around that would inflate, you shouldn't have to put up with that.
Yeah. Do whatever makes you happy.
Yeah, do whatever makes you happy. So I think you're really right in that, just the idea of, are you having the kinds of friends, especially if you're in the single scene, are you having the kinds of friends that as a man, are like, well, how far did you get?
Right.
Or are you having the kinds of friends that would be not okay with the idea? What are you guys doing? You guys are putting yourselves in harm's way.
Right.
Just even that positive social pressure of the people of God that I think it goes back to Proverbs with don't be a companion of fools. It goes to Ecclesiastes with the 2 are better than 1. It goes towards the body of Christ where we find our identity with the people of God, and the norms for us as the people of God are different. And so just the idea, like I know for me, and maybe I might be a little less given to social pressure than the average person. I don't think dramatically less, but when I was dating Karina, it was weird culture-wide that we were saving sex towards marriage. Right. It was not weird in my social sphere that we were. That made it so much easier because I'm like, all right, I know the statistics, but for my, 12 best friends, they all think this is a good thing to do. Right. And that made it much, much easier for us to follow through with that.
I think that's a good point, especially since the cultural norm is to take sexuality so casually. That's a good barometer. If you're struggling with this, you're like, I need to make changes. And then you look around and you're like, I don't think anyone around me would think it's a big deal that I want to abstain or that I want to be pure now at this point or that I want to honor my marriage or whatever it is. You said we're going to have to make drastic changes. Some of these people might even be in your family, and not that you avoid talking to them, but you mitigate their influence in the way that you want to live and the way that you want to grow closer to God and honor what God wants to do.
Yeah.
And I think, I used to tell especially young people, it's going to be really hard for you to grow beyond your friend circle and where they're at and the way that they're living, because there's going to be little motivation and little examples of what it's like to live a godly life.
Yeah. And I think that, just on a practical level, and that's where it's like, hey, if you're listening to this as a high schooler, man, that youth group is going to be so significant for you.
For sure.
Man, I thank God for my youth group. It was huge in my life. If you're a college student, to say like, all right, well, get around a college Bible study, get around, if you're on campus, there's probably a college Bible study there. At our church, we have a college group that gets together. If you're more kind of like, all right, I'm just a mainstream sort of adult, and get into men's Bible study, get into women's Bible study, get into a life. Singles can be part of all of these things. Married people can be part of all of these things. I think like it's some of us make friends quicker than others. That
Yep.
it doesn't mean as soon as you show up to Bible study, you're going to have this great group of friends that you're going to be doing everything with. But man, put yourself in a position where you say, these are the people. Like I remember a distinct point in my senior year of high school where I like to hang out with a group of friends at school, mostly the guys who I played water polo with. And then I also really like to hang out with my youth group friends. And there was a distinct point my senior year where I felt like I had to decide who I was really going to throw in my lot with. It didn't actually end up meaning I totally abandoned the water polo friends. Like I still was around them, but I really looked at it and said, what do I want to be like? Who do I want my influences to be? And thank God I chose the youth group friends, and it was transformative for me.
Yeah, I often think, who is God calling me to transform into?
Yeah.
You know, what is my next right decision? And I think often we have to take it kind of one step at a time. You know, I think maybe if you're struggling in these areas, how often are you reading scripture around these things? How often are you reading other Christian authors and what they have to say about how to be pure and how to honor marriage and how to honor God's plan for your sexual life? You know, if you're kind of avoiding those things because you're sensing that it's going to be a difficult challenge for you, I would think you've got to make one right step in that direction for you to see some growth.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, let's at least, before we finish, let's at least spend a couple minutes on this, because this is something, the Song of Songs talks about, one of the images it talks about is we need to stop and sort of drive out the foxes that are ruining the vineyard. And in the image, I think the main thing that he's getting at is there are threats to the purity of the marriage relationship.
Right.
So let's talk. So we're a couple of married guys. We're talking about this. Let's talk about accountability within marriage, just in terms of, we already kind of talked about pornography. I feel like whether you're single, whether you're married, that's a common thing. But just in terms of saying, how am I protecting myself against, in my body and even in my heart, beginning to wander away from faithfulness to my wife, faithfulness to my husband in this? Karina and I have some things that we've set up that we feel like have served us really well. But I don't know if you and Stacy have some things that you guys have purposefully done just to say, here are things that we're doing to protect the purity of our marriage.
Yeah, I don't know if we have set rules. I was in youth ministry for so long. There were so many kind of guidelines. The girl's side hug,
right?
Never be alone with someone of the opposite sex, in a car, things like that. We still live like that, just because. And she works with college students, and so they often come over, and we have similar rules. I think one of the things that I learned early on in the marriage, and I've even mentioned in this podcast, is that marriage is not to make me happy. God uses it to make me more like Him. And so if I were to begin to have the thoughts of unfulfillment or wanting to wander, I have to remember that marriage daily is a sacrifice for the needs and desires I might have in that moment, to honor the promise that I made to my wife and the promise I made to God. And I think that that's a core foundation that all married people should have, but definitely Christians. And I see how easy it could be if you think marriage is all about you, and when you're unhappy, then the marriage isn't working, how easy it would be
for sure
to wander and look for something else. And I think that, I wouldn't say it's too late, but if at that stage, then you're looking to mitigate who you're around, but you haven't necessarily changed the way that you view what your marriage is for. And so I think we do marriage counseling almost every week, and it's a great time for us to share with each other how we're feeling, but more specifically, kind of some of these needs things. And one of the things that our counselor tells us is we often have to look at the other spouse and tell them, this is the story I'm telling myself. How I'm feeling. This is what I'm feeling from you. This is the story I'm telling myself. Is that what you're projecting? That often leads to conversations about feeling unfulfilled and feeling unloved, and how that person's actions might be leading to that. Those kind of conversations need to happen daily,
for sure,
so that you honor the commitment.
Yeah, and I think that's, all the stuff you said, I agree with. Like, I'll even rattle off, and I don't want us to get caught up in rules, but I'll just say, like, I think that there are things that have become more common that to me are crazy. I'm never in a car alone with another woman. That there may be a couple occasions, and I always cleared it with Karina. All right, that this person asked me for a ride to work, but we don't do that. The idea of me as a married man, like, going to lunch with another woman, to me it's insanity. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's crazy talk. The idea that I would be like leisurely texting with a woman who's not my wife. You know, there are times where like I got to text somebody for business, like Lori, who was on here. I've got to say, hey, do we have childcare for this event? That's fine.
Yeah, but not an ongoing
The
conversation.
leisurely, just sort of like shooting the breeze, to me, I'm like, this is insanity. And part of it does go back. But what you were saying, I think, is so important. It's sort of like the best way to protect the purity of our marriages is not just simply avoiding all of these bad things, but drawing near to each other proactively.
Right.
And I think even within that, we've got to recognize as men and women, we're going to have vulnerable moments. There's going to be a time where you and your spouse, you have a fight, you feel unappreciated. You know, the woman's like, he doesn't really know me or care about me. The man might be feeling like she doesn't really respect all the hard work I do. And then, you know, it's the classic. And there's some secretary, there's some ex-boyfriend, some ex-girlfriend. There's some, for a man, there's
on
some
social media.
There's some woman who just thinks you're the best. And you're like, my wife should think I'm the best, but she thinks I'm the best. Just to recognize there are vulnerable moments like that. We've got to draw near towards each. We've got to use those moments to say, I'm going to move towards my spouse, and I'm going to move towards the Lord. Because as you said, marriage is a great gift from God, but it's not ultimately in its purpose to just bring me temporary pleasure in the right here and now. God has bigger things at stake in what he's doing. And the best marriages, we partner in that, in shaping each other. But even if our spouse isn't partnering with us, God is still at work in that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great way to look at even the sexuality within marriage. I mean, I remember, you know, being a young guy, waiting until marriage to have sex, experiencing a lot of unfulfillment over the years, you know, and having those expectations, you know, that I had as a young teen.
This didn't pay off.
Yeah.
Like, this was supposed to be the best thing ever, and
that's right.
We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, and then even when we talk about purity, I think, you know, you could get that from the previous conversations that we had. Like, it's going to be good because I waited no matter what. And I think that God has other plans even within that to grow us, you know. And I remember an older guy, you know, telling me, kind of struggling with that unfulfillment and the frequency, going, well, what if God is just simply teaching you patience? You know, I was like, oh man, he's doing a really good job of that.
Yeah, he's really doing it.
Yeah, man, I haven't learned patience until I was married, you know, having to wait or whatever, you know, having to sit in that unfulfillment. And I think that that's way different than our culture would say. Not just is sexuality for you and casual, but that even marriage is really to make you happy. And then if you're unhappy with that, you don't need to necessarily have to fight for that.
Yeah. And this is good. And I would just encourage anybody listening to this right now, especially if you've listened to all 4 of these episodes, just ask God the question, what is the thing I'm supposed to do? What is the next step? Is there accountability? Is there a moment? Is there confession of saying, I need to deal with this? Is there seeking healing over a past failure that's really haunting you in some way? That there is profound grace and healing in this area. And there's also so much power in the realm of sexuality that it's worth us spending what might seem like a disproportionate amount of time talking about it, because it does have huge power in our lives for great joy and also for great difficulty. So I just encourage, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this on the Facebook page, leave a comment, leave a thought, leave a success story or an idea that might help somebody else as they're pursuing purity and pursuing healing and growth in this area. And this is probably a topic at some point in the future we'll revisit.
Yep.
But until then, thanks so much for taking the time to watch or taking the time to listen. And we'll see you in the next episode.
See you then.